Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose, and it's almost Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving
Yes.
from America, and we've had some lovely talks on Dante with Cleo and Dimitri, which was a ton of fun, and then we had Annette on anger, which was fascinating and very interesting, and with Sam and Javier and Tyler, and that was really great. And so we're just here sitting outside on this, looks like it's going to rain, but not yet.
Yeah.
So we're enjoying these last moments before we freeze outside on the porch. So we just thought we'd talk about things. So Dante, anger. What do you think about, Michelle?
Well, I was thinking about anger and urgency. I was thinking about, because it was funny. When I was listening to your talk with Cleo and Dimitri, which was wonderful, on Dante. I had this sort of moment where I was like, the problem these days is that people can't call out anger as wrong, because there's a lot of like, anger's not wrong or right. It's just a feeling. It's just something that comes up. And the funny thing is though, I actually, in my heart of hearts, do have the sense that it is something you just simply have to acknowledge as present in the human condition, right? Yeah. We do get angry, right? It seems as though when it comes to kind of the religious perspective on anger, however, I'm not sure if it's a however, it's more about like, what are you doing with that anger, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know that there's actually that much of a disagreement between the two perspectives. Yeah. I just think that they may have different emphases or things like that. And I think there's probably something we can learn from both perspectives,
Well, it's this weird thing of, when does anger become self-righteousness? Because then it's wrong. Like, where you're like, I'm right and they're wrong and I'm better than other people. And at what point is anger just... The thing that we talked about at the net is that anger is just this thing you find yourself in, almost like daydreaming, because of a break in the social field. Like, and it's so instantaneous that it occurs. So there's anger in that sense, but then there's... self-justification too. That's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting though, I mean, I see what you mean about it being like daydreaming, but I almost feel like it almost feels so much more like cause and effect. Like it almost feels like because it does have to do with this sort of breaking of social intelligibility, aka you see it that way, I see it this way, you should see it this way, or I don't know why you don't see it that way, blah blah blah. That's when it's almost like this very kind of cause and effect, right? It's like this very kind of chain reaction. And I do feel like it's, out of all of the kind of emotions we experience, it does feel like one of the most kind of urgent, like it's the one that I associate with speed, with more speed.
Yeah, it's a speed.
And there's something about that means you have to be like extra aware of, like I talked about at the net, like slowing down. Yeah. But I think there's something that's very reactive about anger, and it feels very... I mean, I guess it is like it's daydreaming in the sense of, you're like, wait a second, how did I let myself get so upset?
Yeah, I mean, there's like, a cause to daydreaming, but it's very, like, quick. It's, like, instantaneous. You're just in it.
You didn't really feel like you chose it.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. That's true. That is very fair.
Yeah.
And I think, too, I guess what I was thinking about, though, is how... I had this thought too from the net conversation, but I didn't bring it up. But it's like this idea that if you don't take time to do or address certain things in yourself before the moment, you definitely won't have time in that moment.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like this weird allocation of time or something where, I don't know, say something is, I don't know, you're not facing a fear, or there's something you really feel like you need to do but you're not doing it, or something like that, or like now obviously that gets so complicated in the sense of what is that thing, do you really need to do it, blah 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 blah. But if you're not taking the time to even pay that any attention, I think it somehow, I know it seems unrelated, but it seems like there is some correlation between that and then the fact that you are not able to slow down when the anger arises and it starts to take over. Because it's like, and I don't know if it's just almost like a compensation, like I wasn't taking the time then, or giving myself the time then, so now I'm going to
make up for it.
Well, I mean, I guess, the makeup element is maybe more of one's sense of control. Because if you don't give time to that other stuff, you usually feel like there's like an incapacity sort of feeling related to that. Like, I'm not able to, I'm not doing it, I know I need to, or whatever. And so you feel this sort of strange, like, incapacity. So I think the overcompensation is I'm going to take charge now, and that's what anger often does. But I do think it's related to this element of time.
Yeah.
Because if you give yourself the time you need to process certain things or do certain things you feel you need to do, or face fears you need to face, you may equip yourself better to have some sort of like practice of taking some time to do that. If you're not taking time with that stuff, why would you take time when it's even harder to take the time?
Exactly.
Because the fire is already burning and you're like, oh my,
That's
so
right.
anyways, I was thinking about that related to time, and
I definitely think that pre-work has a massive impact on the intensity of the anger and the likelihood for the anger to turn into something like bitterness or self-righteousness. Like, anger does seem like it's not that controllable often, but you do have control over what you do with it, how long it lasts, the intensity, if you automatically assume certain self-righteousnesses. But then there is also control over what angers you. Like, this is what's interesting. Like, you can be not made angry as often, but then when it happens, there's also an element of having done pre-work, so it's not as bad, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point, and it makes me think too about something that Sam Woman brought up about, this element of like, oh, you should be kind of upset about that, like that you're not, like, that wasn't right what that person did, you should be angry about that. Like, and in the sense of it being, I wonder if there's a way in which we don't get angry about stuff we should be angry about. We do get angry about stuff we shouldn't be angry about. And I was reflecting on myself, and it's like, I mean, I think this is very common for parents, and can be a struggle, but you gotta, again, get curious. We talked about curiosity and anger at the net too. But it's like, why is it so frustrating when my children are frustrated at each other?
Yeah.
Like, I get, or at their homework, or at their whatever it is, or at you. Like, there's this immense, like, in a sense, your job as a parent is to reorient the mirror. Because, they learned language from you, more or less, right? Or school, whatever, those avenues. So for a lot of the time, it was them copying what you're doing, right? And in a sense, their reactions, often I've heard it said that, like, they will react often the way you react. You just don't realize you react that way. That's one part of it, possibly, yeah. There's also the element of it where now you're mirroring what they're doing. Yeah. And I don't know why it happens. Like, again, there's this quickness to it. And also it's like, what is it about anger itself and frustration itself? Because for some people, like, they'll get angry because they got cut off in I mean, it's like stuff that's done to them. Yeah. But I think what's weird is that maybe it's a sense of wanting to create some sense of order, peace, not like having it be chaotic or stressful. And so then when you see people getting irritable, frustrated, angry about things that in your perspective as an adult, you're like, that's not, like, if you put that in perspective, that's not that big of a deal, but for the child it is. So then they're angry, and then really what I find is like, what is it, why is it so easy to get angry about a child being angry about something? And I so it's like this compounding problem, because it's like anger on anger on anger, and it's just, again, I think there's an element of it, really, anger wouldn't, yes, there are times you have to fight fire with fire, but there's I feel in that instance, it's not as if, it's kind of like anger, I'm not sure what that's going to do. Like, it's just adding to the anger, to that scene, like, to that scenario. And but why is it so common? I mean, I don't know, maybe it's not common for anybody else, but I want to say that there are times when it's like, when you're like, there wasn't a problem until the person was upset, and you're like, I wasn't angry, but now you think I'm angry, so I'm angry. It's another, that dynamic happens, I think, more with adults. I mean, maybe it happens in this scenario with kids and parents too. But anyways, I thought that was interesting, because it's like, wow, what is it just about being uncomfortable with anger itself, or being like, that's not justified anger? But if, again, people do feel things, even if to the other person it's not justified. So it's kind of like that place of like holding space, but also trying to put things into proportion. Because I know that I've had to sometimes have people put things into proportion for me, so that I realized, oh, like, or I try to do this, you can do this with gratitude, right? Like, where you say, okay, yeah, like, I'm didn't get this done or this done, so I could be really down about it. But at least let me focus, let me shift the focus, let me put this in proportionality so that I can still see something in this that's, good, beneficial, positive, whatever. Not to just kind of like, people talk about, oh, well, it doesn't just have to be about positivity, but like, is it functional? Are you able to function? So I don't know, what are your thoughts on anger? Because I do think that happens, and I'm wondering why.
Well, there's a bunch of things. If anger is tied to a break in the social field, and there's something about children that have to be socialized, therefore children tend to be a source of breaking the social field more often than not. Not simply because they're playful and silly, but because they literally refuse to do things that if they don't do, there are bad consequences for them or for the household or whatever. Then it's understandable that anger would happen a lot with children because there's constant breaking of the social field, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of things too where, although it's the case you can I just get instantly mad at the children. Usually not. It's usually you do ask them a few times, and there's this idea that they're not doing it or they won't do it, and then. Actually, there's a kind of helplessness in anger because you don't want to grab their arm and violently force them to do something. You want to convince them to do it when they don't want to do, and what else do you have but words? Yeah. So there's a kind of weakness that actually the anger is acknowledging. It seems like it's not, but it actually is very often from a place of weakness because you want to, for their sake, have this done before this escalates to a higher thing, well, now you're going to your room, or now you've missed, you're gonna not be able to do that trip or something, right? There's a way in which there's a kind of mercy in anger, and that's kind of hard to see, where the parent is almost trying to get use anger to keep them from having a worse consequence.
But is it effective? Because usually it just ends up being
it depends. That's a different question. There's motivation and then there's effectiveness, right? Sure. So I think first off...
Yeah, that's true on why it comes up in the first place.
Yeah, I think that sometimes sometimes people describe anger as if anger is a motivation, when actually anger is an expression or an emotion that tends to be kind of motivated by something else. It's weird. Anger doesn't, is anger a motivation? Helplessness is a motivation. Desiring the benefit of another is a motivation. Anger is weird because it seems to be a motivation, but it also doesn't. It seems to have something that is unnamed at its core, like we were saying last night, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, a lot of times anger is motivated by vulnerability or a desire to get the thing done that's good for the person to do, but they don't want to do it, and you don't want to have it escalate anymore to a more dire consequence or something like that. Because also, look, the counter to this is that, well, don't have consequences, just to let them do what they want. But I think, honestly, the evidence just doesn't show that works, and it creates all sorts of unintentional consequences. So I think the parent feels kind of helpless. There's a certain trappedness the parent feels that they're trying to work through.
Right. And the thing is, hopefully the case is, and I think, I can speak for myself, where it's, it's not the majority of the time you're dealing with situations like that, but there are certain kind of, it's almost like it ebbs and flows, where maybe you'll have a day or two where something's, yes, your child's really struggling with something, or your children, or you are, and it's just a human nature where you're learning and growing, and then you kind of resolve that, work through some things that are things you can go to, like equipping yourself with tools in your toolkit that then you can know what to do better the next time that comes up. Yes. That's better for all of you, where you really are learning and you really are being able to do better in that situation. I think though what's crazy is that, for kid, they're angry and they feel justified to be angry because X person won't, they want to play something a certain way, sibling or friend won't play it that way. Right, they're not really listening, and then the parent comes in and is like, but you're not listening about being understanding. So it's this. I guess what I mean to say is, it's having to learn how to be understanding, and realize that okay, maybe we could switch to something else, right? But on some low order causality, we talk about low order causality versus high order causality. On a low order causality, I wonder if there is some element of the child perspective that is I don't see how what I'm feeling is any different from what my parents feeling, because I'm not listening. I'm not doing what they're asking. Well, my sibling's not doing what I'm asking to play this game the way I want it to be played. I'm not saying that's justified. I'm just saying, how does it not come across as you're asking and it's legit, but I am asking and it's a no. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that sort of reason, so there's ditches, on both sides of the road, because I think that kind of reasoning leads to there not being, where it's all equal, like Adele will say in the classroom. I'm not a teacher, we're just students, we're all exploring together, when there's a certain equalization that can be dangerous.
Sure.
Because being mad about a sibling who is too young to understand, not playing something the exact technical way you want to, and you being very difficult, sacrificing the purpose of the game, which is to have fun, is different.
Sure.
And even if the child uses the cunning lawyer move of saying it's equivalent, it's the rhetorician, it's the person who's just using the move on the chessboard to get their way. It's not a genuine conviction, if you will. But so there's that issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's also the issue too that so there's different situations of anger. And it also seems like anger sometimes is more of a method than it is a motivation or a feeling. Like it's a method of negotiation. It's a method of getting activity. Mm-hmm. I think also in a situation like that, the parent is caught between it's good for siblings to play. This technocrat needing things to go exactly your way is getting in the way of that. This is dumb because y'all could be having a good time, and we're trying to correct that, right? So you're also speaking to a place that a good thing is being blocked. A fun thing is being blocked for no reason, and you're trying to get the child to see that.
Nobody thinks what they're doing is dumb. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, no, they don't think it's dumb, but they are mismotivated.
Well, that's what I was saying.
I was saying it from the position of the parent. The parent's like, this technocrat detail is silly and dumb because it's getting in the way of the good time for no reason, right? It doesn't have.
Well, it's about. I think that's why the putting it in proportionality or perspective is helpful here, right?
Yes.
Because, sure, on one level, if the other people play the game exactly the way the rules are, that would function. Like, you couldn't play Monopoly if people were not playing it by the rules, okay? But you've got different age ranges, you've got different understanding levels, and you've also got, what's the bigger picture of this time, which is to have fun together, to play together, to make memories, to laugh, to maybe find the silly thing that a sibling or friend does, and laugh, not laugh at them, but kind of have a funny, see it as something funny versus something irritating and angering.
Yes.
And so it's not dumb strikes me as a strong word, but I understand there's an element in which it's not, it's the proportionality of how that's not really, or the perspective matter, where it's that to focus on that kind of misses the point of what that is. Now, but for the other person, they're saying, but the whole point is that people would do the things that, the rules, right? So it's just weird because it's the rules on a game, right, are different than the rules of life, for example. And to understand that those have different scales, and it's not a hypocritical thing to say these rules are actually at this point more valid than those rules. That's not a hypocritical thing to say because of scale and because of a degree of hierarchy, simply because of growth, right? Your development rose up over time so that you can, actually do that. The rules of life are to live a better life, a life that's actually good for you and for those around you.
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of things. So if it's a game that the children have created out of thin air, if someone functions as the neurotic authority that says this is the rules to the game we created and you must follow, that's different from saying the rules of Monopoly, of which I did not create, are this, right? So there's also a power move here when one kid wants to be the power deciding what everyone is doing, which then is not justified for them to be angry if people aren't playing. But then it's kind of like, if it's Monopoly and there is an official rule set, and they're like, the other kids are not following the rules, it seems different, right?
Yeah.
So that's the issue. I think ultimately what's very interesting here is everything is situational. Everything is situational discernment. And there's a way in which anger is a intuition. It's based on a certain intuition that a situational ethic is not being realized rightly. I think also the trauma of reality is that there is no overriding principles you can carry from situation to situation. And so you find yourself in, dare I say, a dialectical reality like Hegel, constantly basically feeling and tumbling your way through the dialectical logic until you hone the skill of situational reasoning.
Yeah.
And you're also, one of the issues is the reality is the child must eventually learn the situational reasoning too.
Yeah.
And if you overly say it's okay that you're mad, you're not directing them toward the situational reasoning. But then if you also don't treat it in the right way, then it doesn't feel they don't understand, right?
Yeah, they don't understand, or they think like, okay, so it's just always dismissed. Like,
Yes.
why is my anger dismissed, but your anger about my anger is not dismissed,
Yes.
because that's getting to have the final
Yes.
say. Like, that's where it can feel. I think that's why it's so important to understand what one's doing with their anger, because if you you feel angry because you're like, okay, this other person, child, adult, otherwise, is angry about something that is not really proportional.
Yeah.
But me showing my anger in a certain way is not going to be facilitative of teaching anything regarding that proportionality.
No.
However, you do still have a role of teaching, but it's about slowing down, because I do think sometimes there's an urgency of like, I have to get the point in, or like I've got, like, not the point, but like I've got to get the lesson in so much that you end up not living the lesson.
Sure.
To be able to more effectively teach it.
Sure. Well, I think the dare I say the trauma of reality is that, you know, the game Operation, where you got to pull the thing out of the board. And, I basically think that if the word ethics has validity, like, life is a series of episodes of situational ethics that you don't want to hit the border, and hitting the border is anger, which indicates that this is like the experience of anger is the tip-off that you're in a situation of situational ethics that have to be discerned, but you have to fumble through because it's dialectical and has to it's like moving and the target isn't still. Right. And so there's this way in which anger is hitting the boundaries that then makes you go, oh, this is a situation of situational ethics, and it must be because social intelligibility is broke, and where there is social intelligibility, an ethic is maintained. So that, you don't ask about ethics unless ethics are broke. That's kind of the weird thing, right? Mm-hmm. The questions of ethics arise precisely in the moment of a trace, of a loss of them, right? And so there's a way in which you find yourself having to make ethical judgments simultaneous with the revelation that there is no universal ethical principle. There is a live discernment of a situation that then you're dealing with a child who can't understand it. It's almost like the perfect mixture of confounding variables.
Yeah.
You're dealing with situational ethics on a moving target involving children who are like, you've lost it. Like, what are you talking about? And because it's very ethically advanced. And so, I mean, anger is also an emotion that arises when you're dealing with profound ethical advancement, because it's like, I'm hitting things I don't know what I'm hitting. Like, I'm hitting boundaries of the operation board, and I don't even understand why and what's going on. And this should be simple, dang it. This should be simple.
Absolutely. It always feels that, like, that's, I think, definitely a feeling that comes with anger, that, it should be simple, or it shouldn't be like this, or it could be different. And, I think kind of just the recognition of that complexity is important, because then you start to realize why anger arises in those situations, and then, realizing that, okay, to navigate with certain boundaries regardless, but not to say, well, that's going to be facilitated more by a type of, I want to say, calm, and like a calm confidence. I mean, yes, it's just, I think that there's an element to which, if you can be, like, we all respect gravity because we know it has effect, right? Mm-hmm. And it never sort of manifested some of the things that we see as like anger actions, right? Yelling at us or whatever. Like, yes, you could say, well, it kind of, hurt when you fell a bike, but you don't sort of blame gravity,
Sure.
Now, like, the unfortunate thing with humans is that humans can, like, unintentionally hurt one another, and they don't mean to, because you have words, and words are so meaningful, and they can really make impacts, long-lasting impacts. And even if, I think that's why for me, I think a lot of times when it comes to adult relationships is realizing, like, if somebody says something and I can tell they're angry, there's a very good chance they don't really mean what they're saying. Yeah. And I think too, when it comes to, and I think that also applies for children. Children will say things that are kind of, not right or like not true or even hurtful, but it's like they are angry and they don't really mean that, or if they do mean that, they have kind of chosen to focus on something else.
Yep.
And make that the only reality when there's a much bigger reality at play.
Yep. Yep.
And I think, but I guess what I mean to say is there's something about just the laws of nature that are the case. And we can't be that way exactly because we are humans. We have language. But if we can try our best to be consistent in that manner and, again, like I think there's just something about that where it's like, I see what the dynamics are. Yeah. So it's no question here. It's not like some sort of sporadic, capricious environment. It's just what the rules of the laws of nature are. So then you understand, I'm not going to do that, not because I'm scared, but because I have a reality of what the consequences are. Yeah. Dare you say natural consequences or otherwise? But it's like there are. I mean, that's the thing though. The world is going to be full of consequences. Just again, not to be scared of them, but to be mindful and respectful of those, and then also responsible in yourself to know how to navigate and utilize those rules of nature. Yeah.
Well, there's a weird thing in which I sometimes think anger comes from how do I make you take seriously something that can't force you to take it seriously before it's too late?
Yeah.
You know,
and 100%.
So like with gravity,
so it's like it starts flailing its arms like it gets desperate.
Yeah, and also it's very hard because anger as a method, like for your good. Like I can think with my parents, there were times of anger, but it was for my good, and I'm glad they did it because it taught me to take something seriously that otherwise I may not have, right? And so there's anger that is trying to impress upon you a certain gravity or respect or seriousness for something that otherwise you may not, and then if the bad thing happens, it's too late, right? Like, there's a certain seriousness you need to have for using heavy equipment because once you find out why, you've lost a hand, right? Yeah. So that's what's tricky. There's a way in which, like, gravity just is serious. It just works, bam. You don't have to, it's not invisible, it's not mysterious, but, like, really, really getting why heavy equipment is dangerous, you don't want to get why, because then it's too late. So there's a way in which a person uses anger to get you to take something seriously that you can't experience without great consequence.
But anger, like somebody might push back a little bit and say, like, if I got like completely yelled at relentlessly and told I was stupid because I made a mistake, then they're just kind of skittish around it.
I know, but that's why that's like. But anger's not the same in all instances, right? There's sternness. There's anger which is not ballistic and make you crazy. There's anger that makes you go, "Oh, that was dangerous. I won't do that again." Yeah. It's a method. There's something about anger that feels like a method in certain situations. What I'm saying
is like anger as a method though is mindful because a lot of anger is impulsive and it's just says whatever it wants to say, feeling justified.
But I guess the point is these things are conflated often in the literature, and these are different. Like there are different employments of anger. Yeah. It's one of the most complicated emotions. I really do.
It really is.
Because I think it is just underdeveloped in thought. Javier was saying there's no books that there isn't. It's a very underdeveloped thought because it is not like there's differences between anger, sternness, ballistic, berserk. Anger, degrading, like these things are all different, and we use the same words for them.
Some are good and helpful, and some are bad and damaging.
Yeah,
and it's like I think that's the hard part. It's like it all comes though from that impulse of the, like you said, the broken social intelligibility. Yes. Where you say, well, this is very serious, and the other person's saying, either they cannot conceptualize that. Yes. Or they're saying the opposite is very serious.
So yeah, I mean, I can think of as a kid jumping under garage doors and my grandfather being like, "What are you doing?" And that actually being, like, if he would have said, "Oh, I'm glad don't worry about it." Yeah, the garage door could have crushed me. Like, it was a very serious thing, right? And so there's this way in which it gets impressed on you. Because there's also an issue where we as human beings often want to do things that are not good to do and dangerous to do, right? And so how do we get convinced not to do those things without experiencing the consequence, at which point it's too late? That's part of the dilemma.
And the hard part is, though, there's people with temperaments who don't push the line a lot because they realize that on their own intellectually or whatever, that like, oh, Dad said not to do that, Mom said not to do that, so I'm not going to do that because there must be a reason they said that. or you see the other kids who don't listen, and unfortunately they, you know, you see the results of that. And I think what's hard then is for somebody like that, it's very difficult to understand the necessity of the types of sternness. Now, I don't think like that would ever need to be degrading. You know, that, I don't think that would be
it never
acceptable.
needs to be degrading.
But the sternness is like, oh, I guess that's actually necessary
But,
for. Do you see? Because temperaments will really play a role in terms of how we view anger as like justified or not.
But it's not by chance, not to get into the gender issue, it's not by chance that the topic of anger is so mysterious to us in a more effeminized society.
Yeah.
Because females are more likely to be able to be convinced not to do that simply from guilt or disappointment or emotion. Like men, almost the role of men in society is to push the limit. Like, that's one of the reasons they're there, is precisely to almost break everything so that things can advance, right? And that they almost have to be difficult because that's actually good for the system to have some degree of difficulty. But that's why men often can really benefit from sports or, like, difficult things where they get beat on in the wrestling mat or whatever. And you say, well, that's terrible. Well, actually, it seems to have some sort of civilizing effect, right? Now, I don't want to push this too far. I mean, one of the things I was going to say, I really think it is important to, in a way, I don't know if I want to say defend anger, but at least complexify anger. Because if you don't, I think what people now do is because anger is too difficult, they just put the kids on the screen. Screen 100%. is like, is because this is why,
nobody can get on with each other, just watch something.
Yes, that's what happens. And so when anger, this is why it's really important. I don't want feeling anger to be bad. Because then you never tarry with it. And if you're like, well, it's good not to feel anger, well, then put them on screens. Or get them out of the house and send them off, so.
Go to boarding school, right?
Yeah, something like that. So the issue is if we overly state, not that I mean you are or that we are, but
sure.
If one overly states that feeling anger is in of itself bad, well, then you are going to end up in a more screen-based house, very likely, or one that is going to try to avoid challenge or hard things and try to make things, like, not difficult, right? Yeah. Or just, and that, parents need to tarry with the mystery of anger almost. It's like a great kind of mystery.
It is a kind of mystery because, again, you're basically sitting with the volatility that can be children human emotions in a day, that can oscillate so strongly, especially when they're younger, still navigating, or even when they're older. I mean, and then also our own human adult selves can be volatile as well. What I mean to say is that there's a lot of oscillation, and I think sometimes there is that kind of confounding element to it where it's just like, I don't understand why you are so angry about this, right? And then I don't know why I'm so angry that you're so angry about this. And you could just, like you said, you could just avoid all of that if you're like, everyone just get on a screen all day, But that would not solve the issue in terms of it being, how do you actually, how do you work through things? How do you do that? And also as a parent, when should you intervene and when should you not? But then it's like, well, you just let, kids do need to work things out together, I think, to a degree. Like, you don't want to overly intervene, but you do sometimes have to intervene to, especially if they're getting, like, pushy with each other or something like that.
Well, and to me, like, to the point, if we overemphasize that feeling anger is wrong, I definitely think that then leads to cultures of consumerism or distraction.
Yeah.
Because a good household is one where there's no anger, which is one that's going to be more passive and consumptory and screen-based, versus a good household one being that takes on and tarries with the mystery of anger and the difficulty of it. That is developmental. That is more human. So there is something here where it does seem important to get straight what is this mystery of anger.
But because it's hard to know how to communicate around it so that you don't vilify the feeling of anger, but you also say that the fact that you're pouting around and kind of kicking stuff.
Sure.
I mean, sure, like, go kick a ball, okay, but that's fine. That's probably a better use of that energy. But, like, kicking down stuff, that's just, you could, you're throwing something.
But there seems to be a difference between wanting people to see you as angry and doing things to be seen as angry, or doing things that then will get you acknowledged as angry and feeling anger, right?
Yeah.
Like, there seems to be like, people will want to be seen as sad, so someone comes and pity them, right?
But
that
but
seems
why
different from being sad.
Well, I don't know though. But why would somebody go to such lengths if they could just be seen as sad? Like, or I could see that being upsetting. Like, sometimes that demonstration has been thought to be like that person's not being seen. They have to go to these lengths to be seen, and they're trying to get attention in a wrong way, you know. And it's like, is that it? I mean, I think there's a part of it that I can concede to that, and I think there is some element of that. But how much of it is also like somewhat performative to the, like you're saying, where you kind of get, you know, you might get a different answer out of the situation, yes. Or you might get
something you want.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is too, like, you know, sure, I do think that a lot of times, you know, attention. People will seek out attention when they don't feel either they're not attending to themselves or they're not receiving healthy attention. I do think that's a degree of that, just in the sense of like, if you are not allowing yourself to receive attention because you won't be vulnerable about a certain need, you might start to seek that out somewhere else with bad attention.
Sure. I mean, that can happen, but this is, again, situational ethics, because I think a lot of times it's manipulative. I think there is a genuine trying to be seen because no one's looking at you, but then there's a certain self-importance or wanting, like, why do you need to be seen, right? But then there's a way in which you're not being seen when you should be seen, and that's psychologically damaging. You see how it's all a situational ethics, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's a situational ethics, then being human is really hard. And I think
there's no, like, you know,
formula. There's just the discernment. There's just the active discernment live. And I think perhaps of all the emotions, it is anger that most clearly brings out this problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, anger might be, I totally get what you're saying about sadness and possibilities of needing to act to be seen when you're not being seen when you should. I totally get it. The thing that fascinates me with anger is anger might be the emotion that makes this problem of situational discernment most vivid. It might make it most clear to see, and then in light of that, all emotions can be reinterpreted or rethought. Like, it's almost like anger can be ground zero for rethinking all of the emotions in light of the issue of situational discernment because of its unique qualities that we see. So that's why anger seems so fascinating, because it seems to give a certain revelation about all emotions.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite true. And I do think I like talking about it in terms of how kind of confounding it is. Because a lot of times, you know, with other emotions, it's a little more understandable. I mean, I can recall moments of being like, why does this make me feel so sad or something?
Yeah, sure.
Like, or why is this upsetting?
Yes.
But upsetting. See, it's more about the being
offness.
Yeah,
the
like
brokenness. There's something is broke. Something's out of joint.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting though, because a lot of times the things that sometimes people would like get angry about, you know, there is a way in which you can also just, you know, some woman sort of hinted at this, like pointed toward this possibility where you just don't talk. You don't. You bottle it all up.
Yeah.
You don't say anything. You get, and I think that some people just get sad. Like they let their anger be its more base emotion, which might actually be sadness or some relation to sadness. But then they really still aren't doing anything with it. No. Where somebody would get kind of like fiery and kind of sassy about something. And that usually is kind of thought of, well, for the person who bottles, that's usually thought of as like, oh, that's kind of confrontational, that's sort of mean. Yeah. And maybe it is. I mean, I'm not saying that's like the right course of action. Yes. But it may also, in a way, it's you still have to figure out a way to deal with that offness, that kind of, it made me feel a certain way. And I didn't like that, but I also didn't think it was, you know, I didn't think I had grounds to really say anything about it. But then the only risk with that is you get really angry somewhere else.
Yeah, sure.
You know, when you feel safer to do it, or like where you feel like you can maybe get something you're asking for, which is not healthy at all. I'm just saying, like...
Yeah. Well, what you're pointing at is the mysterious, odd quality of anger, because there's a few things like, it's very easy for me to think of, you know, people often say don't get angry. but they're much less likely to say don't get sad. Because if you're sad, it almost always is like a reason to be sad. You don't tend to get sad over things that you shouldn't be sad about, right? But so that likewise, we don't tend to say, don't be happy or something, right? It's anger that seems to justify sometimes saying you shouldn't be angry in unique ways, right? I mean, the only way I can think of sadness is, say, if you believe in the afterlife and somebody dies and there's a notion of you shouldn't be sad because, they're saved. But what does that cause? That can cause a lot of trouble for people. That can all sorts of pathologies. Anger seems to cause these pathologies because it's like more... You don't have to, say, believe in heaven or believe in the afterlife to face these paradoxical tensions of the emotion.
Yeah, and they can happen quite a
often.
bit. Yeah,
yes.
quite often. I mean, this is not like just once in a blue moon. It's like frequently.
It's frequently.
Or it can be frequently.
Yes.
Not always, but you bump up against these differences so readily just because people are different.
Yes.
People are different. And if you have any type of proximity, I mean, you will feel it more in families, I think, sometimes, in family dynamics. That's why people, unfortunately, it's hard sometimes for people to, like, the family, which can be one of the greatest sources of joy, love,
yes.
Ease.
But it's ground
comfort.
zero for the mystery of anger.
Absolutely. So it's also the place where people, like, have such a hard time even being around family because of drama or whatever. And it's like, that's something that I think a lot of it is like anger or latent anger, or not knowing how to process that sort of stuff. Because I'm not saying it's only anger, but I do think a lot of it is that, because it's or constantly, if you want to say it's like constantly. Upsetting. People are upsetting each other constantly, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like what it. And I get it. It's like ultimately it just makes me think of like this hyper reactivity, and it's just like if I'm not saying it's like a cure-all, but if there's something that can maybe facilitate a pause.
Yeah.
It's like how they said, I don't know who said it or what, but the idea of like if you wrote out a letter, right, versus having the immediate reaction to the person.
Well, Eisenhower, I think, was kind of famous for that. Yeah.
You're like, oh, you know what? I was really mad. I wrote that out.
Yeah.
I realized I'm not even going to send that.
Yeah.
You might still send it, but you might not.
He made himself, the legend is he made himself wait 24 hours. He'd write it out, then put it in a desk, and then if in 24 hours he decided he still needed to do it, he would. But when he left office, his desk was full to the brim of these. That's the legend.
No, it's powerful. And I mean, I know that and it kind of makes me think of what Rivera was talking about too, practices and things like that. Just make yourself, it's almost like making yourself have to do something before you just get to have the impulsive
thing.
You
create an anti-nut. You nudge against it or something.
Which people have talked about this in many different kind of scenarios.
That's correct. I mean, I think to what you're getting at, the family... I think what happens is, like, especially as you get older, the family turns out kind of suddenly to be this temple of the mystery of anger. It's like this place where the mystery of anger rears its head, and you find yourself suddenly confronting it and kind of locked into it. It doesn't seem to happen as much when you're young, but then again, I think it just depends on your family. I think, unfortunately, more... broken families, it can appear more. So I don't want to overdo that. But there's something, maybe the mysterious, I guess I want to say this. As you get older, the mysterious quality of anger perhaps becomes more vivid. Yeah. Like when you're younger, it's like anger bad. Like it feels more black and white.
Oh yeah.
But there's something.
Set and
Yeah. But when you get older, there's a certain mysteriousness that appears, and it's almost like too what ends up happening. And I think this is a reason why people struggle with family and relationships is like the mystery of anger appears, and you have no resources by which to even understand it. No. Like the society has given you no tools. No. The teachings that you got from church or school or class are just not adequate, and you find yourself trying to understand a situation that you just simply don't have the resources to understand, and you're stuck in it. And so that, I think that's also part of the intensity of the anger, is the very mysterious feeling of the anger intensifies the anger. Mm-hmm. Like the mystery of it makes it harder. Absolutely. Like it makes it worse. So it's like you're locked into the mystery.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to put it. And I do think that element of what is that, in a sense it makes me think about like what our orientation toward mystery itself. Like I wonder if it's if that says something about our relationship to mystery itself, if we have such a difficult time with anger as this sort of confounding thing, this like
I mean, not to interrupt, but I think actually seeing anger as a mystery is like this first step toward addressing it, like medicine. Because if you, like we were saying at the net, if you see it as a mystery, then you're looking to name it. You're looking for its cause, and actually finding the right cause seems to make the anger go away.
Yeah,
like locating it, like actually seeing anger as a mystery.
Yeah.
A murder mystery or something that you're trying to figure out, or like, how did this happen? Who done it? Like, that's actually a big medicative step for the mystery of anger. Seeing it as simply a bad emotion or something you shouldn't do, that doesn't seem to help because it's there. But seeing it as a mystery, which in one token makes it sound like there's nothing we can do because it's a mystery, actually in another way is precisely the beginning of steps by which to address it, because you see it as something that needs to be thought about, like worked through, and getting at the name of it, like we said at the net. So there's a paradoxical move there, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I'm glad we could talk about it, and you know, it was tremendously helpful having the conversation at the net, and now as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. I think it's really good and important to talk more on the topic, because it certainly is. There is that mysterious element, but I think that is a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Hegel, you know, a limit you identify is a limit you're moving beyond, right? So even see it as a mystery in of itself, I think, is actually a big step. So for more, to the net episode, I think it's 127 on anger. So and for more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, Amazon. We have our short story collection, Under the Wing, out.
Yes.
Anyone who picks it up, we'd love to hear your thoughts, reviews, stuff. We always appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.